Hello and welcome to our discussion today, our third in this course. Today we are looking at HRIS selection and implementation. Okay, so all right, so that's it. So we look at HRIS selection and the implementation. So we'll look at selecting an HRIS for your organization, the factors to consider. Then we look at the implementation process and then how to handle change in the adoption of HRIS. So basically, these are what we'll be looking at in this course. So after you go through it, we discuss in class. So in selecting a system, a human resource information system for your organization, it's important to know who your users are or who is going to um, implement whatever system you are going to put in place, who is going to use it, or who your customers are. All right. So for every HRIS, you have either employees as users. You can also have non-employees as users. So some of the employees you can think of are managers, you have analysts, you also call them the power users. You can have technicians or those who are going to work on the system. All right. So they are the HRIS experts. Then you have the clerical employees, so the office staff, and then you have the organizational employees. Then you have the non-employees, those who are likely to look for job from your organization. So you have the job seekers, and then the sourcing partner organizations. All right. So all these people are likely to use your system if you finally implement it. So in selecting an HRIS for your organization, it is important to know who your customers are and who your users are or will be. Okay, so once you have those groups of people in mind, it's easier to select the right HRIS for your organization. It's also important, apart from getting to know who is going to use the system, to also know the categories of data that you will use in the system. So there are various categories of data. You have information about people, right? Remember, it's a human resource information system. So you have information about people, all right, about employees and everything about them. So you have information about people. Then secondly, you have information about the organization. All right. So in most of the cases, you have what the organization expects from the employees. So you have information about the people, information about the organization. And then the third one is data, which is created as a result of the interaction between the information about the people as well as the information about the organization, right? So in the interaction between the first two categories also gives you the third class of data that will be used in the system. So you have three categories of data: information about the people, information about the organization, and then data that is created as a result of the interaction of the first two categories. Okay. Then we move on to the HRIS selection itself, right? There are steps in the selection process. The first is to assess the organizational needs. Secondly, you define the HRIS requirements, and then you research available HRIS solutions. You evaluate vendors and requesting proposals. You evaluate your vendors, and then you also request for proposals from these vendors. And then finally, you make a decision on which HRIS to adopt. So we will take each of the steps and say what each step entails, right? So the first one is assessing the organizational needs. And with assessing of organizational needs, you first define the needs, all right? And this is the first step. You define the needs. Here you identify the current HR challenges as well as your future goals. So what is the reason why why are you actually why do you want to get an HRIS, right? What do you want it to do in the organization, right? What need have you identified in the organization for which you want to select and implement an HRIS? So you define the organizational needs, you identify your current HR challenges, and then your future goals, right? You also want to look at your current processes against the hurdles you face as you go through those processes, right? And then you also look at why or what you hope to achieve with your new HRIS. So if you implement the HRIS, what exactly do you want to get from it, right? So that is the first step of the selection process. And in doing this, it is important to involve stakeholders, right? And the stakeholders here are the users that I spoke about earlier. So you have employees, sorry, you have management, you have other customers, external and internal employees or non-employees. It's important to involve all the major stakeholders, especially the staff and employees of the organization. Okay. And as you engage them, it is important to find out what they need or what features they are looking out for in the HRIS. Okay. You also want to ask what their concerns are so that you have a broader scope of what the HRIS is supposed to do, right? And also in the needs assessment phase, you develop a selection criteria, right? And in developing the selection criteria, it is important to look at the essential features you are looking for, the budget available for you, right? And then the ease of use of that particular HRIS. You also have to consider how easy it is to integrate the new system with an already existing system if you have any, right? So the first step of the selection process is to assess the organizational needs. Then secondly, you define the HRIS requirements. Okay, so here what you do is to list the essential and desirable features. So based on your engagement with stakeholders, you are able to define exactly what the organization needs. So you list all the essential desirable features, okay, like your payroll management, your attendance tracking, benefits, everything that has come out as a result of your stakeholder engagement, you list them down. And then you consider system compatibility with existing enterprise applications, all right? And as you do this, you ensure that you have established security, privacy, and then compliance benchmarks. Okay, so this will give you a framework within which you proceed with the HRIS selection. Okay, then you research available options, okay, whether to make use of an on-premise or a cloud-based HRIS solutions. We have explained what on-premise and cloud-based HRIS solutions. If you missed it, I would recommend that you look for that lecture and go through it. All right, just to refresh your memory. But you compare whether the organization will want to use an on-premise solution or a cloud-based HRIS solution. Okay. Then you evaluate the software vendors based on their reputation. Okay, you can also check the reviews they have had from other clients. You may also want to check their industry experience and possibly request for product demonstrations and trial versions, if any. Okay, so that this this is basically like a research you are conducting on the background to know which vendor to go for, all right, or the number of vendors that are available for your particular solution. Okay, and then you also are able to know the track record of these vendors based on their reviews, on their reputation, or the experience that they have over the years, right? So once you have done all of this, then you evaluate the vendors. Okay, here what you do is that from your research, you would have come up with a number of vendors and maybe narrowed down to a few, maybe 3 or 4 vendors. So based on the shortlisted vendors, you issue a request for proposal. So you ask them to send you quotations, right? And you analyze the vendor responses based on functionality, based on the cost, the support, and compliance. All right. In our parts of the world, most of the times we look at cost. But beyond cost, there's the need to consider functionality, support, and also the compliance of the system, right? And then you conduct reference checks with the existing users of the shortlisted HRIS. So beyond the research you did earlier to help with shortlisting the vendors, after asking for proposals or after asking them to quote for your application, it's important that you conduct checks, okay, to ensure that you are getting the right person to provide the service. And then the final step is to make the decision. Okay, so here you compare options against budget constraints and organizational needs, right? So you check the available quotations against the budget available to you, all right? And then you can make your selection. So once you have compared against your budget constraints, sorry, you secure executive approval for the chosen HRIS. Remember that in this case, you'll be working with the HR department. So it is important that once you have been able to select the system, right, you are able to also secure approval from management. Okay. And then once that is done, you establish a contract with the selected vendor, and then you ensure that everything is clear in the contract. Okay, how you are going to be supported as an organization, how service will be provided, I mean, after sales service for the system. Okay, so it's important that all of these are clearly spelled out so that both parties are clear on what is expected of them and what they are supposed to do. Okay, so basically, this is the selection process for HRIS. And there are some factors to consider, right, while selection. The first one is cost, right? It's important to consider cost because sometimes with the cost, there are various elements of cost. You can have the initial cost, the ongoing cost, and then some other hidden costs, okay? And so it's important that in cost considerations, you don't dwell only on the initial cost. Otherwise, you may be taken by surprise. It's important to know that beyond the installation of hardware and licensing, there are also some ongoing costs and some hidden costs. So there can be some subscription fees, maintenance fees, support services fees. There can be training, all right, customization fees, data migration costs, and all of these may be hidden. You may not know about it. So it's important to have a thorough discussion on cost, all right? Then you also have to look at scalability, all right? How can the HRIS you have chosen accommodate business growth and maybe an expanding workforce? For example, if now you have about 50 employees, and you are planning that in the next 4 years or 5 years, the number of employees are going to increase from 50 to about 200 employees. Is the system you are selecting such that it will be able to support 50 employees now and 200 employees later? Okay. If not, how will you be able to expand? Okay, so all of these are considerations that you have to make. Then there's also the integration capabilities, where you have to ensure that your selected HRIS is compatible with other systems that you may have already. So if you have a financial system already installed, maybe the finance team are using another software, you want to check how compatible your HRIS is with the already existing system, right? And then you also have to check the user experience and accessibility. Okay, remember that this system will be used by people, by employees. And so how easy is it for these employees to use the system? It's also an important factor to consider. So you have cost considerations, scalability, integration capabilities, and then user experience and accessibility, right? And that takes us to the implementation phase. So once you are done selecting the HRIS, then you move on to its implementation. So for the implementation, you have the planning, the development, deployment, and then finally you have the maintenance. So at the planning stage, what happens is you define the implementation objectives and timelines. You want to give yourself objectives so that you have a focus. Otherwise, you'll be doing everything and you'll be all over the place. Okay, so there's a need to have objectives for implementation as well as timelines that will guide the implementation process. So you set up objectives and timelines. Then you identify key stakeholders, right? Once you identify the key stakeholders, which are mostly the users of your system, you have to form the project team, okay, or the HRIS project team. Then you conduct a feasibility study and risk assessment of the implementation. Once this is done, you develop a data migration plan where you are able to transfer existing records onto your new system, okay? Then at the implementation stage, you customize the HRIS to meet your organizational needs, right? You configure the settings, you include access controls where necessary, right? And then you assign roles to each user. So for example, a subordinate and his manager, will not have the same roles assigned to them. Okay, there are some controls that you may want to introduce so that unauthorized people will not have access to some parts of the system. All right, so you include access controls and then user roles. Once this is done, you test the system functionalities in a controlled environment, right? In a controlled environment means that you have not now started to use it at the organizational level. So maybe a selected few will use the system, test all of the functionalities, and give feedback or give you a comment or a review of the entire system. Okay, so once that is done, it will make you know if the system will function effectively like you want it to, or there has to be some changes that are made before everybody uses it. So if the feedback is positive, then you go ahead to train the HR personnel as well as key users on how to operate the system. Okay, so this at the implementation stage. Once training is done, then you move on to the deployment stage. The deployment stage is where you roll out the HRIS in phases. In phases here means that you don't just start everything at a go. It's important to roll it out in bits. Okay, I spoke about pilot testing earlier. So prior to full implementation, there's a need to test it. I test the system before full implementation. And then at the deployment stage, you also monitor system performance as well as addressing the user concerns. So during the pilot stage, if there were concerns that were raised, you have to monitor the system's performance and address all of the concerns that are raised. Then you provide real-time support and troubleshooting. So as people start to use the system, if they encounter issues as they use it, you'd have to provide real-time support and troubleshoot the problems as they come up. Okay. Then you also have to gather feedback for improvements at the deployment stage. Then finally, we have the maintenance stage, where regularly after the system has been installed and is being implemented, you have to conduct regular software updates and security patches. Okay, so as the system is being used, you conduct updates, monitor the performance, okay, conduct audits, get user feedbacks. And all of these will help you to provide the needed training that the users need, as well as provide the technical support that they require. Okay, and then from time to time, you have to review the system scalability, especially where you have a growing organization. Okay, so if the number of people who are using the system is increasing, then you have to review the scalability and check the options for upgrade as the organization improves. Okay. So you will notice that once you are introducing a new system in the organization, right? It will cause for effective change management. Otherwise, the system will be implemented all right, but you will not be able to get all that you require. You would not use it to the max like it should. Okay, so it's important that as you adopt the HRIS in the organization, you also look out for how best to manage the change that is happening in the organization. And the first step is to communicate the change, right? It is important to clearly articulate the reason for the HRIS adoption. And also, it's important to communicate the expected benefits. The users need to know how beneficial adopting that HRIS is for the organization. All right. It's important to engage them early in the decision-making process. You don't wait until about 50% of the work is done before you communicate the change. It's important to engage them early, very early in the process, right? So right from the selection phase, where you are selecting the HRIS, you engage the stakeholders, engage the employees, and then make them a part of the change. Okay, so it's important to communicate the change. And then as you communicate it, you address all their concerns. Okay, if they have questions, they can easily ask, and then these questions are answered for them. Then after communicating the change, you also have to ensure that there is enough training, right? So you give employee training and support. It's important to provide hands-on training sessions and user manuals. Let the people know how to use the system, okay? Offer continuous support through help desks and online resources. And then implement a feedback mechanism to address the usability issues, right? Yeah, sorry. So basically, you want to provide the necessary support for users. Okay, so you communicate the change, you train and provide support. The third one is to manage resistance to change. Not everyone is going to move along with you smoothly. All right. It's important to identify potential resistance points and proactively address them. Okay. So if you look through the employees, you notice that there are some people who are likely to resist the change that is being implemented. In the same way, there are others who would embrace the change wholly. So it's important to assign change champions to encourage peer adoption. So among the employees, you identify those who are comfortable with the change, okay, and make them change champions, right? And these are the people who would help to encourage their peers, okay? Their peers here referring to those who are resisting the change. So you realize that it will no more be a top-down approach, but it will be among peers. So the change champions will encourage their friends to adopt the HRIS. And then you reinforce the positive impact of HRIS through performance analytics. So you check how each employee is making use of the system and the progress they are making, the challenges they are making. And all of this is to help you to manage the resistance that is likely to come up when the change is being implemented. And then finally, you measure your success, okay? So it's important that you establish KPIs, key performance indicators, right? And these KPIs will help you to conduct a survey after people have started using the system. It will help you to know whether the users are satisfied with the system, okay, or they are not satisfied. If they are not satisfied, what exactly are they not satisfied about, right? If they are having challenges, what is the cause of the challenges that they are having? So based on all of this, you are able to make the necessary system adjustments based on the feedback and the performance data. Okay, so basically this is how you manage change whilst adopting a human resource information systems, right? So for our activity today, you are expected to just get an organization, right, that's implemented HRIS, okay? And let's check whether in the implementation of the system, they succeeded or not. So if the organization succeeded, you would want to examine the factors that led to the success of the implementation. And if the organization failed in its implementation, you would also want to examine the factors that led to the failure of the implementation, right? So these are what we'll discuss in class. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.